The Biden administration has launched a new ad highlighting his visit to Ukraine earlier this year ahead of the G20 summit in India, taking place this week into next.
It was the first time in modern history
very significant moment on the world stage
that an American president went into a war zone not controlled by the United States.
A nearly 40-hour journey in and out of Ukraine.
President Biden left Washington, D.C. at 4 a.m. on Sunday. He landed in eastern Poland and then took a 9.5-hour train to Kyiv.
He entered Ukraine under the cover of night. And in the morning, Joe Biden walked shoulder to shoulder with our allies in the war-torn streets, standing up for democracy in a place where a tyrant is waging war to take it away.
Air raid sirens blared as the two men walked together.
In the middle of a war zone, Joe Biden showed the world what America is made of. That's the quiet strength of a true leader who doesn't back down to a dictator. Biden, President.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
The ad is set to air in battleground states this weekend during the 60 Minutes broadcast. Good ad? Bad ad? Somewhere in the middle?
I thought it couldn't be better. I thought it was beautifully done. I think it reminds people just how physically able he actually is.
Because he got on a plane?
Well.
And walked?
In a war zone.
Oh,
in a war zone that is not controlled by a green zone of U.S. military protecting and monitoring him. This is not our war. The fact that he did, I would just like to brag that the First Lady, we actually went to the war zone that wasn't ours first in a armored caravan to cross the border into Ukraine to bring the First Lady of Ukraine out of hiding, which was really, I wouldn't say I was scared, but like it made the Secret Service and regional security very nervous when you're going into a war zone that is not protected by U.S. troops that have no role there. There is no green zone, which is the safety and security that American troops provide when a president or first lady go into a war. But usually those war zones are our wars. This is not. So it was a pretty big deal. But back to your point, the ad also, it really highlights a point of pride that the president has in how he and his team were able to bring together the European allies, our European allies, NATO, strengthen NATO, hold NATO together, and expand NATO, which is everything Putin did not want to happen. He was able to not only defy Putin, but we beat him at his game. That's the reason why he invaded Ukraine in the first place, because he's so scared to death of NATO, and all he did was make NATO stronger.
Scared to death or emboldened, I wonder. But I'm a little flummoxed by the Biden campaign deciding to make this one of their first big advertisements. We know that according to polls, Americans are becoming less excited about the idea of sending additional U.S. aid to Ukraine. They generally don't want to be involved in another war. And even though the Afghanistan withdrawal under Biden was handled pretty disastrously, there was a huge appetite for getting out of that 20-year conflict. So to start with this image of Biden walking through a war zone that most Americans don't want to be more involved with, I thought was a little odd.
Well, the last poll I saw said 57% of Americans, which came out of the Wall Street Journal, conducted by the Ronald Reagan Institute, said 57% of Americans actually support keeping Ukraine aid going to support the country, which I gotta say, as a student who was in college during the start of the Iraq War and the Bush administration's effort to democratize the rest of the world and save democracy, it is fascinating to see how far the Republican Party has come from their really aggressive pro-democracy, anti-Russian, anti-communist views, that they are all of a sudden questioning whether we should support democracy in the country that neighbors the former Soviet Union. Where has the Republican Party of Reagan, who ended the Cold War, gone?
Well, neoconservatism is dying or dead, and I think for good reason, because we learned through the Iraq War that you cannot
The Iraq War that you created.
Well, not me.
Well, the
George
Republican
Bush.
Party.
Well,
Look,
I'm not a spokesperson for the Republican Party, first of all.
I supported the war. I supported the war when we went in.
I think we learned very clearly that you cannot fight your way to democracy, and you can't force democracy upon a nation that's not interested in it. And so merely putting troops on the ground or spending money or sending weapons doesn't ensure democracy across the world. That was a foolhardy idea, first of all. That's why neoconservatism is going out of fashion. But on a second point, I think people see that there's not a real end goal here with the Ukraine-Russia war, and they want people to go to the negotiating table and figure something out. And there were, in fact, negotiations brought up by Russia months ago that were rejected by the United States government. They didn't want Ukraine to go to the table. And we've spoken to numerous former military officials on this show that we've interviewed, where they say, this is not a matter of Ukraine just getting more money and they're going to win. There's not a path to victory for them at this time. So why don't we prevent additional bloodshed? Why don't we save American dollars? And why don't we convince both sides to come to the table and try to find probably what's not going to be considered a just or perfect resolution, but something where both sides can be a little bit happy?
Yeah, well, if you give a mouse a cookie, what's the old rule? The mouse is going to want more. I think we learned that from World War II. I don't think we're about to ever let that happen again, especially to one of our friends and one of our allies, a country that we have actual commitments to, that we made commitments to in the 90s. And America lives up to their deals and lives up to their promises. And when the Ukraine broke away from Russia in the early 90s, we made deals with them that we were going to be there to protect them. And that's essentially what NATO is. And I hope at some point they do get to become a partner and a member of NATO, as they are about to become part of the EU. But maybe you're right. Maybe that the administration hasn't done enough. And this was always going, once the Republicans took over the House, this was always going to be an issue for the White House, was that they are going to it's unbelievable to me that we have to explain the importance of a democracy succeeding in Europe. But nonetheless, apparently we have to. For some people who question why we're there, it should be obvious. I don't think we would question whether or not we should be in Italy if the Russians tried to invade Italy as well. So I think that it is up to the administration to sell the message and to explain to, I guess, people who don't understand what it would mean if the Russians were to, if we were to just say, hey, go ahead, have it. Have the rest of Ukraine, have Kyiv, have Crimea, have it all. What's next? Finland?
Well, and I don't think anyone's suggesting
Norway?
that, and I don't like the underlying suggestion by a lot of people on the Democratic side that if you oppose sending more aid to Ukraine, or you don't want to increase aid or increase U.S. support, that means you're pro-Putin. I think it's more about being realistic. And the reality is
we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We're fine. We can do it. We can do everything we need to do and help our friends and allies and live up to our commitments.
But we don't want an indefinite conflict either.
We're not in an indefinite conflict.
Well, then what's the end? Somebody's going to have to come to the table, yeah?
Right.
Because there's no realistic path to victory for Ukraine.
This is a war between Ukraine and Russia.
So why can't we, as their partner, as someone who's supporting Ukraine, as you said,
those efforts are happening. Like, there are diplomatic efforts happening.
Why? But they were shut down months ago.
That's why Tony Blinken was just in Kyiv. There are efforts happening, but you don't conduct diplomacy on TV. We're not necessarily privy to everything that is happening behind the scenes.
Well, sure, that's true. I just don't understand why, when this potential resolution was brought months ago, the U.S. said, no, we're not going to do that, and instead continued to funnel money and weapons to one of the most notoriously corrupt countries in the world.
Well, first of all, we're not funneling anything. We are authorizing them. The Congress is authorizing the aid to our ally to defend themselves. First of all, we know exactly where the money is going.
We don't,
we know
though.
exactly.
We don't. Just a few months ago, there was an accounting. There was an accounting error
exactly.
of $10 billion.
And by the way, those weapons, those weapons are not going to waste. Not one bullet is going to waste. They're going to a Russian. And we know exactly where those weapons are because of technology and because of how well they are secured before they go over there. The administration has done a fantastic job in controlling the flow of our weapons to Ukraine and making sure they are getting into the right hands. And believe me, Ukraine won't waste one single bullet on a Russian.
I'm glad to hear that a Pentagon accountant is going to go over to Ukraine and pull every single bullet out of a Russian and pick all the shell casings off the ground to make sure they were all used appropriately. That's good news to me.
As long as the weapons are getting into the right hands, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. More Rising after this.